Hi folks, welcome to another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield. I'm your host, Mike Dobbs, and we're not actually going to be talking about government. That's refreshing. We're going to be talking about something very, very important in our community, which is the Community Foundation of Western Massachusetts. And with us is its president, Megan Burke. Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks very much for having me, Mike.
Now, I was looking you up yesterday, and the words new president is next to your name. How long have you been president of Community Foundation?
It's good to know it's still listed as new. I have been in the role now for 3.5 years.
Wow,
so
okay.
We should probably update that.
You're newish.
Newish. There's always more to learn.
But still a wily vet. Okay, so yeah, tell your people that you're at Community Foundation, update the website. And I was looking at your background and holy cow, you were involved with the international campaign to ban landmines. I'm very impressed by this because that's one of these issues that I think somehow people believe that it's no longer needed, but it certainly still is needed. And it affects literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people in other countries. I'm very impressed. How long were you with them? So my career has definitely had a pretty circuitous path, but I feel so incredibly fortunate that I've done important work in all kinds of different ways. With the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, I worked for that organization, for that coalition for about 10 years, and I had some background in landmines before that as well. And it was incredibly rewarding work. I mean, I got involved primarily as a researcher initially. I was living outside the United States, and I was able to travel to mine-affected countries, speak with folks who had been impacted by landmines, speak with government officials in those countries to hear what they were doing about landmines, and all really with the purpose of saying, how can we create, a world that's safer for folks and where we're not violating international humanitarian law, but making sure that civilians in armed conflict situations are safe. Right.
That was pretty exciting work.
I'm very impressed. Also impressed that you began your career working on international peace and security issues at the Ford Foundation and through the United Nations. Again, holy cow.
Yeah. I've been so fortunate. I finished my education and I said, I really want to live in New York City. It's an exciting place. I had studied international relations. And just to really digress slightly, I had an experience when I was in high school where I was able to go on an exchange trip to the Soviet Union. So I'm obviously aging myself here.
Wow.
I was young, I was 15, and it was just incredibly eye-opening. And I was like, wow, young people can come together and think about how we don't have to hate each other. And I think that really inspired my career. I ended up getting an incredibly exciting position at the Ford Foundation, where I worked with the portfolio around peace and security issues. That was the first place that I really learned about the landmine issue, and this was very early 2000s, right after the international treaty on landmines had come into effect. And so it was an exciting moment to really think about this kind of civil society movement globally that had brought about this change in the world. And we also worked on some small arms issues and all kinds of interesting things. But it's definitely what set me on my path to work on the landmine issues.
Wow. I'm very impressed. Very impressed. So again, I think a lot of times people are a little bit confused about what the Community Foundation does. Now, I've heard about the Community Foundation because my wife, who is now retired, spent most of her time as an adult working with nonprofit agencies. Her last gig was she was the executive director for an emergency food pantry in Indian Orchard. So small nonprofit. And so
super important work, though.
So she's very aware of the challenges to nonprofits.
Depending upon what the mission of the nonprofit is, I think it's fair to say most times the need outstrips the financing to do the job that you need to do for people. And obviously the Community Foundation is something that's trying to address these issues with nonprofits. Is that a fair statement to make?
Absolutely. I think that's totally fair. I think community foundations in general are largely unknown by lots of folks, and it's totally reasonable that they're unknown, but I think they're some of the best kept secrets. There's about 900 different community foundations across the United States. Community foundations have a specific geographic coverage area, so we are all kind of collaborating together. We're not competing. The Community Foundation of Western Mass covers 3 counties, Franklin, Hampshire, and Hampden County. We're based here in Springfield. And we do exactly what you described. We're really trying to help nonprofits to do their work better, whether that's through grant funding. We offer some capacity building and training for nonprofits. We also create spaces for nonprofits to come together and talk with each other about how they can work together. In addition to that, we, like many community foundations, are a pretty significant provider of scholarships for students. We also have an interest-free student loan program. We, I think for our size, are particularly large scholarship program, and we award anywhere from $1.5 million to $2 million a year to students from our region so that they can complete their education. So we do all of those things, and we're really just focused on this community, which is kind of an exciting luxury to be able to say, like, how can we make this community an even better place than it is? And I would say what also makes us a little different than other kinds of foundations, like a private foundation that might be a family foundation or a corporate foundation, all of which are doing great things, but we are actually the community's foundation. We belong to the community. We should be a resource for the community. And the resources we have to distribute in the community also mostly come from the community. So it's really, I like to say, neighbors helping out their neighbors, right?
Sure.
Some folks have a little bit extra and they want to connect that to their, neighbor down the road who might be having a temporary crisis or might need a hand up. And we're the forum to help do that. So for folks who are feeling generous, they can set up a fund with us, which can award grants or scholarships, and we can help them with that. They can also join us with the resources we have that the foundation directs, and they can be part of a community review process or help connect to nonprofits or to students, help with outreach. We have hundreds, maybe thousands of volunteers who help with scholarship review, grant review. So in this way, I would like to think that we are the community's foundation, and we really connect with people in all sorts of different ways.
Wow. And I understand that, just this week, June 11th, was 413 Gives, and the Community Foundation benefits from that. Is that true?
So yeah, I'm so glad you asked about this. This is a new initiative. This is the first year. Some folks may remember Valley Gives, which was an initiative of the Community Foundation, which I think everybody in the Valley loved. That was really designed to help nonprofits connect to donors. And at the time, it was very early days of online giving. So the Community Foundation was able to serve as a platform so that nonprofits could receive those online donations. And while I think some changes over COVID and changes in the way many more nonprofits now can do their own direct collecting, we started to think about, like, how can we renew the spirit of Valley Gives and find new ways to inspire folks to give back. In this particular instance, this past 413 Gives Day, which was June 11th, we collaborated with New England Public Media and with our fellow community foundation that serves the Berkshires. So we cover Franklin, Hampshire, and Hampden counties, as I mentioned, and with the community foundation in the Berkshires, we cover all of Western Mass. And so 413, it's all 4 counties. We really wanted to have a coordinated, collaborative effort to remind folks that nonprofits make Western Mass great and that folks can contribute directly. So
actually New England Public Media collected all of the donations.
Okay.
And then they are dispersing those to the 2 community foundations. They're not keeping a penny, which is, I think, pretty remarkable. And then with those funds, we will then not keep a penny either. So the community foundations will each get a chunk, and we will be re-granting those out to nonprofits. The theme for this year is specifically around the impact of federal funding cuts and federal policy changes on nonprofits. We've received a fair amount of information that we've collected from our nonprofit partners, and we know that many have been impacted by those changes, causing them to have to reduce services, straining their budgets. In some cases, they haven't necessarily experienced a cut, but they've seen an increase in demand for their services because other policy changes have reduced federal assistance. And so we really wanted to say, we can't fill the gap that the federal government may have created, but we can certainly provide some assistance that will help some people. And so this was really a day to ask folks to step up. It was very recent, so I don't have any figures yet.
I was going to say, did people step up?
I know hundreds of people stepped up.
Great.
And it was a one-day giving, our first attempt to do this. So we're excited to hear as soon as all the numbers are in, and we'll make those funds available to nonprofits. And we'll see if this went well, and if folks thought this was useful, we'll certainly do this again in the future.
From your perspective, do you see particular trends in needs? In other words, are you getting applications? Are you interacting with nonprofits where you see that there are particular trends that these nonprofits are going through that speak to address a particular need or a particular change in society?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that there are, referring back to the federal policy changes, that has impacted the way nonprofits are doing business. And it's across most sectors. So it's not necessarily just in food security or housing stability. It's also impacted the demand for legal assistance for immigrants and refugees in our community. We've seen increased security concerns from some members of the faith-based community or the LGBTQ community. And when there are security concerns, nonprofits have to spend money on that. And so that really diverts away from whatever else they were spending it on before. I definitely think the food security issue is really dominant. There was a significant cut to the Western Mass Food Bank that then trickles out to the food pantries, of course. And the arts sector, actually, I would say, there's been some cuts from federal funding for the arts. It's also impacted, funding here in Massachusetts. And so it's hard to identify a sector that hasn't been impacted. We do, at the Community Foundation, have some priority areas in terms of where we direct our foundation-directed grant funding. But, across all of those sectors, there's been folks who have been impacted. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we also have a focus on racial equity and social justice. And we really believe that creating opportunity and equity for all is a great way to lift all boats in our community, and it really positively impacts everybody. And I think many nonprofits who work in that space have struggled to be able to stay the course due to sort of executive order guidance from the federal government that if they are reliant on federal funding. So we've really tried to figure out how we can offer support to those organizations.
Right. Okay, so I noticed online it talked about last September, nearly half of the 250 nonprofit organizations that applied for a community foundation's flexible funding grant reported it experienced the ripple effects of cuts to intermediate agencies, loss of multi-year support, equity retrenchment, and rising administrative loads, which is what you just talked about. So these are organizations that are literally in the trenches doing good work in our cities and towns. And of course, they have been sort of kneecapped by what's been going on in Washington. So it really, you spoke of NEPM, and of course, they lost all kinds of money. And certainly now any organization that typically had federal funding in their portfolio can't really rely on it anymore.
Yep.
And so now it's up to us.
Yep.
It's up to
Yeah.
people here locally.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we did collect that data in September that's available on the website. We also recently had another grant opportunity that I'll share very briefly about in a sec, but through that application process, which concluded in May, we basically were able to ask the same question again. And I actually wrote this down because I wanted to get it right. Out of 178 nonprofits that applied through what we called our community resilience grants, 147 reported federal funding cuts, disrupted services, and strained budgets. So, you know, it's not a direct overlap to the folks that we heard from in September, but I think it's pretty clear the trends and the challenges that nonprofits are facing. That community resilience grant opportunity was something that arose because there was a member of our community who is anonymous. So when I say community, not sure if they reside here in our 3 counties or somewhere in Massachusetts, who basically stepped up and said, I see the challenges these nonprofits are facing, and I would like to make $1 million available for the Community Foundation to re-grant out specifically around these funding disruptions. That was an incredible gift. We were asked, would you like to do this? And can you do it in a very short time frame so we can get the money out? And that's, I think, literally what community foundations are made to do. And so, of course, we said yes. We wanted to make sure that funding could get available. And what we saw was of the $1 million we had to distribute, we had requests for 7 times that amount.
Wow.
Across those nonprofits who applied, to meet all of the need that they had, we would have needed 7 times as much. And so in many ways, 413 Gives Day was yet another opportunity to say, okay, we had this incredible donor, whoever this person is. Not everyone has quite that capacity, but we all have some capacity to step up. And so any funds raised through 413 Gives Day will also go towards that unmet need that we weren't able to satisfy. I do want to also just add that I mentioned this before. We as the Community Foundation, even with all the generous support of everyone who resides in Western Mass, cannot fill the hole that the federal government has created. And I think this is where there's other aspects of our work that comes in. And that is really calling on people to say, it's amazing that you step up and be generous. And we all need to remember that we are residents here. Many of us are citizens. We have a role in the political process. And we need to speak up. If our government, whether it's the federal government or the state government or our city government or our municipal government, whatever it might be, isn't enacting the policies that we want to see, we need to be active. We need to vote. We need to register to vote. We need to get out the vote. We need to participate in town meetings, because otherwise extreme voices will dominate. And I actually think that the vast majority of residents of Western Mass agree on 90% of things. We care about one another. We're a community that looks out for one another. And I think we need to remind the government that we want some reasonable approaches to that.
I certainly agree with that. Yes. So you operate in Franklin, Hampshire, and Hampden counties. Do you see differences between these 3 counties in terms of the priorities that the nonprofits talk about? From my perspective as a journalist, I view that different towns have different personalities, and different counties have different personalities. So I was wondering, from your perspective, do you see differences in what people are interested in?
That's a great question. And certainly, you know, from Springfield being our most urban location up to Franklin County, where it's incredibly rural, absolutely people's lives look pretty different and people experience things in different ways. We actually have the benefit that we're just completing a strategic planning process where we did do a pretty extensive outreach to the community. mostly through our nonprofit partners, community leaders, some of our donor communities, students, artists, and we got a pretty wide swath of responses back across the 3 counties. And we really were asking in that particular outreach, what are the greatest needs in the community? And what do you think the Community Foundation does well? Because of course we want to intersect those 2 points and say, where can we have an impact? And we can't do everything, of course. And interestingly, what got lifted up the topics didn't necessarily vary per se. The top 2 issue areas were food security and housing stability.
Okay.
Across all 3 counties, that was the most critical needs that people were identifying, and they weren't necessarily saying they were food insecure, but they were saying these are the things that I see in my community. We also saw a lot of support to continue our work on arts and creativity, knowing that that's really important to society, to continue our work on equity issues, and to continue our work in education, particularly around post-secondary completion, workforce training, things like that. And then folks also lifted up some areas for us to explore, for example, environmental sustainability. So we're still sorting through a lot of that information.
Sure.
We're looking forward to announcing some new directions and some old directions, not huge dramatic adjustments in July. But what I do want to say is I do think through focus group conversations that we held, that's where we started to see the nuance that I think you're referring to, in that while the challenges might be labeled the same, something like housing stability, the approaches or possibly the solutions will look quite different. There's in an urban center like Springfield, we have a lot of buildings that have been here for a while and maybe have some deferred maintenance and need to be brought back online to support the housing crisis. Whereas in Franklin County, there's other challenges, rural areas where maybe zoning regulations maybe create some kind of barrier to further development, or just the costs of development over a wide rural area just create a different challenge. And so when we think about what our role can be, we definitely plan and will respond to the feedback we received, but we're always keeping an open mind to hear from the community about what approaches they would like to see us, whether it's through our funding or bringing folks together to explore solutions, so that whatever those solutions are, they make sense in those communities. And I'll just say one last thing. I'm probably going on too long.
No.
I also think one of the things we do here in Western Mass pretty well, compared to some other places, is collaborate. And so when we think about something like the housing challenge, I really think when we get beyond a single town or a single city and we start to think about ourselves as a region, we'll start to see some really interesting solutions come forward. So while the challenge looks different in different places, we all recognize we're in this together. So we're looking forward to having some of those conversations and seeing how we can have a part in that.
Sure, because housing ties so many other things together. We're very concerned about retaining young people, and young people would like to be able to buy a house or a condo, or they would like to have a nice place to rent. And the difficulties is if they don't find it here, then they're going to move elsewhere.
Absolutely.
And they're going to take that educational investment that they represent elsewhere. So issues like that, if people think that it's just about a place to live, it's not. It actually affects so many different aspects of a community. So it's interesting that it was food and housing.
Yep. Yeah. No, that was fascinating. And I'll be the first to admit we don't have a lot of experience at the Community Foundation of Western Mass on housing. And I think that's actually healthy and good, because we
You can look at it with a fresh eye.
Absolutely, and we can be humble, and that's what we should do as a community foundation, and say, who are the experts who are working on this every day in our community? We have some incredible nonprofits that think about this, from breakfast to dinner and in between, and we just want to ask everyone in the community, given the tools we have at our disposal, how can we help?
Right. So clearly, if somebody is listening and watching our program, which naturally I hope they are, if they want to donate to the Community Foundation, what is the best way of doing it? And if we have another generous person, the anonymous person that you just spoke of, What is the best way to approach you guys? What is the best way to try to make a positive impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, anyone can donate at any time on our website. We have, an annual fund that we collect for that really supports us to do the work that we do, and helps us to really, get money out into the community the way that it can be most effectively used. I would also say that we always encourage conversations. We try to be out and about in the community, however and whenever we can. We'll be holding a series of gatherings starting in August, 7 gatherings, 4 in August with nonprofits, and then we'll have 3 community gatherings in the fall. And those are opportunities for us to share our strategic plan. We'll also be celebrating our 35th anniversary. So we'll be, sort of talking about our impact over the 35 years. But most importantly, we'll be inviting community members to be part of our work. And being part of that work can look all kinds of different ways. It can mean donating. It can mean setting up a fund. And funds aren't just for rich people. We have a number of funds that are really collective giving, where community members come together around a particular topic. I'm actually going to be attending this evening a banquet for our Latino Scholarship Fund, which is essentially a collection of residents in our community who said, we want to fundraise together so we can support students. And we administer that for them, and it is an incredibly beautiful event that they hold every year to celebrate those students who have been selected for that award. So if folks want to learn about things like that and how they could do something like that, they can come to one of our gatherings, they can email us, they can call. All of our information is publicly available on the website. They can stop by our office on Bridge Street here in Springfield. But we also have tons of other ways for folks to get involved. We work with hundreds of volunteers, as I mentioned, to help review scholarship applications, grant applications, serve on committees of our board. We are of and for the community, and so we're always welcoming folks who are interested in volunteering. And if we ever have job opportunities, we love to hire from within our region. We love to retain young people, help them advance their careers. So I would just encourage folks to follow us on social media, check out our website, and see what all the opportunities might be.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in, and thanks for answering these questions. I'm sure that a lot of people have heard of the Community Foundation. Steve, of course, was very interested in making sure people who heard it, now people understand it.
Great.
Well, and how they can participate in it.
So happy you had me on. It was a real pleasure, and I realized I didn't mention our website is communityfoundation.org.
And I didn't ask you, so
no, that's
we
okay.
both
I
failed.
I'm not a good plugger, apparently, but but it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And folks, thanks very much for watching another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield.